Hello, my name is Javier Morales. I'm going to be presenting Discovering Scientists, a rhetorical analysis of scientists portrayed on kids' films. And there has been a resurgence of conspiracy theories such as anti-vaccine movement and flat earther. There is a growing erosion of trust in science. To reverse that trend of distrust in science, it is imperative that audiovisual media aimed at children begins to reshape the representations of scientists. An analysis of content designed for children could shed some light on the types of scientist portrayal to which young audiences are exposed. The scientist portrayal have been the following: the destroyer, someone who inadvertently causes harm; the inventor, someone who often involved in government weapon development; the mad scientist, an archetype typically associated with villainy. And also the studies around the representation of scientists have been focused on the appearance of the scientists and the role of scientists in public life. This project is going to follow that same logic. So kids usually see scientists as older Caucasian males in a laboratory setting, using chemistry instruments, wearing glasses, having a crazy hair, and wearing white lab coats. And also, they are imagined doing secret things, following dangerous procedures, and using technology. Such descriptions are in line with the representation of scientists in many shows such as Dexter's Laboratory or Rick and Morty. So I'm going to be analyzing a series of movies from a very uh, popular streaming service to answer the following questions. What are the various ways in which scientists have been depicted in animated movies available on Netflix Kids? For that, I'm going to build a sample of 15 movies using purposive sample. So the method that I'm going to be using to analyze these movies is a rhetorical analysis of scientists. For that, I'm going to be using the three basic elements of rhetoric as defined by Aristotle, which are logos, ethos, and pathos. Logos is the logic or reason, the reasoning of the scientists. In that regard, I'm going to be looking if the scientists in these movies are following the scientific method, which means thinking and coming with having a question, being curious, planning an experiment or something, designing an experiment, collecting data, analyzing the data, make conclusions or contributions to the body of knowledge, having that eureka moment in which you find the truth about the world and then repeat. Regarding the ethos of the scientist, I'm going to be focused on the appearance of the scientist, like age, gender, ethnicity, and what it wears, like the clothes that they are wearing. And then regarding the pathos, I'm going to be looking at the motivation and morality of the scientist. So one of the initial challenge, the main challenge of this project was the sampling. The sampling was very hard because I was at risk of using the same problematic stereotypes about scientists that have been endured through history to define the scientists that I was going to analyze. So the first idea was that what is really a scientist? In that regard, I went to a study talking about the word scientist, and they were talking about the fact that a scientist is someone who is a professional and a specialist, someone who is very educated and has more knowledge than an average person. So in that regard, we were looking at someone very educated, and I came up with the idea of using the title of a doctor. A doctor is a very good indication that that person is considered a scientist. And not only that, when someone is called a doctor on any media product, most of the audience immediately assume that we are talking about a scientist or a physician sometimes, but we are trying to not use the physician part. I try not to use any doctor who was a physician, only those who were scientists. So was my final sample. I only managed to find 11 films on Netflix Kids with a scientist that would fit that condition of being called a doctor, at least. And and I only found those 11 movies. So the results, after conducting the whole analysis, I found that the ethos of the scientists portrayed on those movies is the following: the appearance of the scientists were the same that were found on previous studies. They were Caucasian males using white lab coats. They were typically older age, although we see here in kids movies that we see a lot of uh, scientists who are younger than typically in other genres of movies, like maybe movies for adults. And also regarding the ethnicity of the scientists, we see also a little bit of diversity, with some scientists being a little bit darker skinned, but generally they are Caucasian. Also, the expertise of those scientists were mainly physics. There was no social scientists in these movies. Regarding the logos of the scientists, most characters did not perform any scientific activity. They did not collect data. They did not analyze data or design an experiment. They have anything of related to the logic of being a scientist. There was no Eureka moment show on those movies, no moment on where they found something. And those scientists were mostly inventors, people that invent stuff, weapons, products, whatever. Regarding the pathos, there was a strong emotional appeals, either negative or positive. And for me, that's a benefit of this type of representation of the scientists, because they are shown as people who are driven by emotions, so the audience can relate to them and can engage with the story. Although most of the scientists portrayed are not protagonists, they are mostly antagonists and or supporting characters, with kind of diminish that the effect of having those strong emotional appeals. Finally, there are no social scientists, as I already mentioned. As in my discussion, I want to talk about how science has been stripped, has lost its narrative. Because for that, I want to use the example of the cycle of water. The cycle of water, I wonder, do people really understand the cycle of water? And I don't mean the series of steps of condensation, transpiration, precipitation. I understand the deeper meaning of this cycle of water, the meaning that without the cycle of water, life would not be possible. And I want to highlight that to show that science has no narrative. No one is talking about how important the cycle of water is in the dimension of it is the main thing supporting life on this planet, and it's very perfect and it's very unclogged. They only highlight science as a series of steps full of jargon. There is no story, and I understand that science is all about logic, induction, deduction. It's a lot about experiments, data. Where is the story there? Can the logic be the plot of a good story? Probably not. Can the experiments be a good action scene on a movie? Probably not. Can the Eureka moment, could we put like a kiss scene on one of those? What I'm saying that communicating science is hard, and we are seeing that in the portrayal of science and scientists on these movies. Finally, the representation of scientists is very simple and fall in lines with the perception of that children had about scientists. Future work, I would like to analyze other characters than the doctors on the movies. Of course, there are some characters that show some characteristics of scientists, such as the collection of data. For example, Sherlock Holmes could be a good example of that. Even when that person is not like a scientist per se, some of those characters show more characteristics, more of a behavior of a scientist. Finally, I wanted to give like a solution for this problem of the representation of scientists. And I wanted to say that we could call Spider-Man or Tom Cruise a scientist. Even when they are not typically a scientist, they show those behaviors of a scientist. And that's kind of a crazy idea, but I think that could be also part of future work and develop that idea there. And also reinventing the narratives, showing the climatic eureka moment, and appreciating the deeper value of knowing the truth, not just inventing stuff. Thank you.